Hi guys, Kiana here with the Emerico Science Center. I'm going to be taking a trip down to the beach today and I thought I'd take you guys along with me and let's see what we can find together. So the first thing we come across when we come out to the beach is some beach warning signs for beach safety. This one here covers our beach warning flags, which change every day. So double red flag means that the water is closed to the public. Single red flag is high hazard. Yellow flag is medium hazard. Green flag is low hazard. And purple flag means that there's dangerous marine life. Today it looks like we have a yellow flag and a purple flag, so low hazard and dangerous marine life. Another important sign here talks about rip currents. Rip currents are something that we have pretty commonly here, but they are very dangerous, so it's very important to be aware of them. Basically, they're a current running perpendicular to the shoreline, so it's a current that's going to be pulling you out deeper and deeper into the water. It is recommended that you do not try to swim directly against the current because you will become exhausted, and instead you are recommended to swim parallel to the seashore and get out of the current before trying to swim back to shore. So now we're going to be walking down our boardwalk, and this boardwalk is going to be carrying us over the sand dunes here. It's really important that we do not walk through these sand dunes because it disturbs the grasses and plants growing there, and those grasses are necessary for us to be able to keep those sand dunes in place. Otherwise, they would be washed away by the waves and the wind. The first animal we came across today was our sandpiper here. This is a shorebird. Most specifically, this is probably a sanderling, and these guys are pretty common in our area. They're usually seen dodging in and out of the waves in the little wake zone there as they're looking for food, and they're characterized by being very fast and very small. You can watch these guys trying to search for food as they stick their beaks in and out of the sand as their waves come back and forth. One of the first things we found when we got all set up out here were these stalked barnacles. Now these guys are a little different from some of the other barnacles we found later on, but these guys are pretty cool because they're able to kind of close up their shells once they are on dry land. Hopefully once we get this guy back in the water, he might come back to life for us. And here we have a piece of sargassum seaweed that I found in the water. So this is a pretty cool algae. This is what we consider a yellow-green algae. It's got little air-filled bladders, which are those little balls you see on there, and that helps it to float. And so it's going to be found on our beaches pretty commonly for certain parts of the year. We also have a barnacle attached to our seaweed here as well. So if we take a closer look at one of these sections of our sargassum weed here, you can see a white lacy structure appearing on some of the leaves. This is actually a different organism altogether. This is what we call a lace-crusting bryozoan. So these bryozoans are going to be epiphytes, so they grow on top of things like algae, just like this one right here. And so what they do is they are taking a ride on that algae to get a better chance at feeding, filter feeding up in the water column. So these guys like to feed on phytoplankton and stuff like that. But these are actually a colony of zooids, so they're not plants. They're a group of animals that all live really close together, and they're pretty small, so they're hard to kind of distinguish, but they are not plants, they are animals. Alright, let's take another look at our goose barnacles. So the scientific name for these guys is Lepus anserifera. And so as you can see, he's kind of coming back to life here. He's got those little things sticking out of the top of his shell there. So those are actually called cirri, and those are kind of little feathery legs that he uses to kind of catch particles floating in the water so he can eat them. So these guys are filter feeders there, and you can see this guy as he's kind of sticking those cirri out in the water to catch those little particles. Then he brings them back into his shell there where he can eat off any little things that he caught. So here you can see crawling across one of our sticks here is a sea snail. So this guy is a Florida rock shell, and he is going to be one of those gastropods that feeds off of other shells. So he likes to eat things like bivalves. So we said that gastropods are univalves, which just means they have one shell that is spiraled around them. So these guys are the originators of those shells. They are able to secrete those shells themselves. They don't have to find shells made by other creatures like hermit crabs do. So he's going to be continually growing that shell. As he grows, he'll be adding more and more layers to accommodate for his growing size. And then if you look closely at his body there at the front of his shell, he's got some things sticking out. On the sides there, he's got some eye stalks that can also be used for sensory things. And in the middle, he has a siphon, which helps him with water control. If we pick him up, we can kind of see his body a little bit better. So this is his mantle or his foot, and so his foot is used for moving. So he's got the ability to kind of grab onto objects like the stick or the sides of rocks to kind of move himself along. And then he also has a hard structure on one side of that, and as he moves, we're going to try and get a better look at it, but it's going to be that orange reddish structure there. And that's going to be his operculum. So the aperture or the opening of his shell there is where his body is sticking out of. But as this guy is going to be exposed to the air or dry land like this, these guys are going to want to kind of retreat back into their shell to keep their bodies nice and moist. And as he retreats into his shell, that hard operculum there is going to cover that aperture opening to help retain as much moisture inside that snail shell as possible so he doesn't dry out and die. So that's very helpful for these guys. It's also a way that they can protect themselves if they want to draw in all of their squishy parts and just have that structure on the outside protecting them. Sargassum seaweed drifts also provide shelter for a lot of really small fish species and juvenile fish. So this guy right here is a juvenile triggerfish, and so you can tell these guys apart from other fish because they have a modified dorsal fin which they're able to move up and down kind of like a trigger. And so this guy was found floating around by that seaweed and using it for shelter. So we call juvenile fish or fish babies, we call them fish fry. And so a lot of times those babies don't look like the adult forms. And so this guy right here is not one that I'm familiar with, but he is an example of that fish fry who's going to grow up to be fish that maybe we might know a little bit better. So see if you can figure out what this guy is right here. You can see him floating at the surface of the water there. So this is a juvenile seahorse. We were able to catch him up and take a better look at him. So I don't know if he's a boy or a girl, but we know that seahorses are one of the animals that have the males carry the babies. And so you can kind of see them swimming around here freely, but they have that coiled up tail there that they usually use to kind of attach onto different structures to kind of keep them grounded, but you can see him just free floating in this clip here. So here we caught another fish that I actually was not able to identify, but something cool about this guy is he's almost completely translucent or see-through, and the only part you can really see is right by his head where his eyes are. So while we're hanging out down here by the pier, we're going to kind of get a closer look at some of these pylons and look at some of the stuff that's growing on them. So if you look closely here, you can see some barnacles. So these are a little different from the ones that we had looked at earlier. So those were more of goose barnacles, whereas these ones are oftentimes called inkhorn barnacles. So these guys don't have a stalk on them. They're just fused to the surface directly. Something cool about these guys is that they have a cement attaching them to those pylons there that is being studied because it is one of the strongest and most waterproof adhesives known to man. So let's take a look at some of the shells and things I picked up on the beach here. So the first one, this is a calico scallop. You can identify them by that flat edge up by their umbo at the top or bottom, depending on which way you hold it there. And then next guy we have here, this is a whelk that has been broken open, so you can actually see the whorls pretty well in this shell. Here we have a slipper shell, and underneath the shell it's actually got a little bit of a flat edge there that kind of looks like the seat in a boat. And then I also have some trash I found. So this is a fishing lure that was discarded. This next shell is called a kitten's paw. It's closely related to the lion's paw, but much smaller. Something kind of interesting about these guys is they're usually fused to a structure, so usually you find the left side of these shells because the right side is going to remain stuck onto whatever it was living on. So it's usually just the left side that you see, but these are bivalves. So this next thing here resembles a little white bird, but is actually part of a sand dollar's mouth. So inside of a sand dollar, they have a mouth that is composed of 5 of these little structures, and altogether they are called Aristotle's lantern. But once that sand dollar dies and all those proteins dissolve, those mouth parts break apart into these 5 little bird-like structures. So these next guys here are some tapered shells. These guys are called turrets, or sometimes they're called drills. If you look closely, we've got a perfectly drilled hole in one of them, most likely coming from a more carnivorous, aggressive gastropod who drilled into this guy to eat him up. So our next shell here is a limpet shell. So this is one of our only gastropods that does not have a coiled shell. So what he's going to do is he's going to attach himself to rocks and things like that and eat algae by scraping them off. And it's going to use that hole on the top of him there to expel any excess water or any waste. And the next gastropod we have here is either a milk moon snail or maybe a baby's ear. It's kind of hard to tell when they're this small. Then we have one of my favorite shells to find. So these are our olive shells. So these are gastropods that are characterized by having a really long, narrow aperture. So here we have what looks like some jaws with some scary teeth. These are actually the lower parts of the chelipeds or claws of some crabs. So here we have some fragments of coral. These guys are oftentimes confused with rocks or with plants, but they're actually animals. So these guys are going to be colonies of animals all living really close together. So they're going to be living in those little holes in that structure there, and they're able to secrete that structure themselves so that they have something to live on. But they aren't those rocks and they aren't plants. They're actually animals all living together in a colony, kind of like our bryozoans did. And they're going to be filter feeding by sticking out different appendages out of those holes there. So here we have another gastropod, so it's got a nice tall spire and big body whorls. So this is a juvenile fighting conch. So another thing we found out here on the beach were a lot of these little molts here. So a lot of crustaceans are going to have a hard exoskeleton covering their bodies. And so as they grow, they're going to need to shed that outer covering or molt. And so it's not uncommon to see these molts laying on the beaches as they wash up on shore. So here we have a juvenile crab. So as crabs are growing and developing, they go through a lot of change or metamorphosis. So they have a couple larval stages. So this is an example of a late stage megalops larva. And so you can see he's more circular instead of that oval shape that he's going to reach later. So as we walked out onto the fishing pier here, one of the first signs we saw talks about sea turtle safety. So unfortunately, sea turtles are oftentimes entangled in fishing line and get hooked by these fishermen. And so the proper procedure when this happens is to not cut the line and instead go to the pier station to get a turtle net, which is a tool used to get the sea turtle up onto the pier safely. And from that point, you're supposed to call local wildlife authorities to come and retrieve the animal and give it any health care it needs. But instead of discarding fishing line for those turtles to get entangled in, the pier provides these special monofilament recycling receptacles for you to dispose of your fishing line in responsibly. So here we have a sign warning fishermen of our endangered Gulf sturgeons to try and protect them. And so something cool about sturgeons is these guys actually have ganoid scales, which are scales that are diamond shaped and almost composed of the same things as bone is, and it's only seen in a couple orders of fish. And if you look closely here, you can see a sea turtle floating up at the surface of the water, taking a couple big breaths. So these are marine reptiles we have right here on our beaches. Like I said, 6 of the 7 species of sea turtles nest right here on our beaches. So this one right here is a little far away, and so it's kind of hard to tell what they were, but that first one I believe is a loggerhead, and the second one here looks like a green sea turtle. So their nesting season is from May to October, and we've actually seen our first nest laid on our coast very recently over in Perdido Key. So like we've mentioned in some other videos, there's lots of things we can do to help out these sea turtles. So one thing is making sure that our beaches are clear, so no trash or holes or sandcastles left behind once we leave for the night. Also making sure that we are turning out the lights at night so that these guys are able to find their way to the ocean once they hatch, and that they don't get confused and go towards our buildings or our cars. And also making sure that we do not interact with these guys if we do see them in the wild. So it looks like some fishermen earlier in the day caught this remora here. This guy is unfortunately no longer living, but we can get a good look at him. So If you take a look at the top of his head there, he has a modified dorsal fin that acts as a sucker. And so what these guys do is they like to stick themselves to the bottoms of sharks and other large animals, and they feed off of scraps as they're going through the water. If you remember, today there is a purple flag meaning dangerous marine life. This is almost always referring to jellyfish, and today we have some sea nettles out here. They are not deadly, but their sting can definitely make your swimming experience a lot less fun. So here we have a brown pelican hanging out at the pier. This is one of our largest bird species and most common pelicans found in our area. These guys are oftentimes seen hanging out at piers in hopes of getting an easy meal, but we have do not feed bird signs all around to help discourage fishermen from feeding these guys so that these guys don't get encouraged to hang out in these areas, and that can prevent them from getting caught up in our fishing lines. So here we have another brown pelican over on the bay side doing some fishing. So their technique is to kind of take a big gulp of water and hopefully be able to catch some fish in there as well. Their bills can hold up to 3 gallons of water, but that's actually twice the size of their stomach. And so they have to spit out some of that water and then just swallow whatever fish they catch in that bill. So our beaches are also home to a lot of nesting shorebirds. So Florida wildlife officers often rope off areas for these birds to be able to have their babies safely and not be disturbed by people. So here we have some nesting skimmers and their babies resting right by the road. So here we have a marsh crab. These guys are going to be in rocky areas just like this, hiding in little nooks and crannies really close to the edge of the water. These guys have pretty big helipeds or claws, so as you can see, those right in front of him there are used for protection and also to catch and manipulate food. These guys are examples of crustaceans, and they can be pretty fast. So see if you can spot our next friend here. He is also a crustacean. So this guy is a swimmer crab. So he's pretty similar to the last crab that we saw, but these guys tend to spend a little bit more time in the water. So their last legs are modified into swimmerettes. And so it's basically little paddle-like structures on the very back of them instead of all being walking legs like the ones you would see further up closer to the front of its body. So inside of the shell here we have a hermit crab, and like I've mentioned before, gastropods are responsible for generating these shells. So this is the shell of a crown conch, but it's been taken over by this little hermit crab here. So they use those shells for protection, and they're going to switch out their shells as they grow so the shell doesn't grow with them, and instead they're just going to leave that shell and find a new, bigger, more comfortable home for themselves. So as you can see, they hide themselves away in that shell for protection, but as he's getting more comfortable here, you can see his little antennae and his eyes sticking out. And as he gets a little bit more comfortable, he's going to bring his little legs out and he's going to scurry his way back into the water. These guys are a little different from the hermit crabs they usually sell at souvenir shops or pet stores. Those are usually land hermit crabs and not the same as these guys that you see right here. And so if you are ever the owner of one of those hermit crabs, do not let it go back into the ocean because that is not where they're from. So here we have an egg casing. This is most likely the egg casing of a crown conch. So inside each of those little folds there, you've got a couple little dots, and those are each going to grow into their own gastropods. So here we have some bones that I was able to find in the water here. So this first bone is actually a fish vertebrae. So that's part of its backbone there. And down those holes on the side is where you would find its nerve cord. And then I'm not really sure what this other bone is, but it was another one I found right there in the water. And I'm not exactly sure what it came from or what body part it might be. Another thing we often find floating around the water is little pieces of jelly. This is actually called mesoglia, and it does come from jellyfish, so it's part of what the bell or the body of the jellyfish is made out of. So this is one of the animals that could have come from. So this is a ctenophore or a comb jelly. It's not a true jellyfish and it doesn't have any stinging cells, but it does have little cilia on the side of its body there that are the combs, and those help to move it through the water, and they also have some light reflecting properties that make it look like it has bioluminescent rainbows coming off of the sides. The Portuguese manowar is another one that we have around here that is jellyfish-like, but is not really a jellyfish. This is actually a colony of polyps that are all specialized. So you've got some that are specialized into being stinging cells like jellyfish tentacles, and some that are specialized to being floating cells that are going to create the sail that allows these guys to float on the surface of the water and get from place to place while they're trying to fish. So logs like this provide nice structures for different animals to come and converge at. So you see lots of plants growing along here. You also see some fish and crustaceans that like to use these areas for shelter and for food. So they're a great place to find some sea life. So here I've caught a pufferfish. So this is a really small one, so he's still a baby, and he is a smooth species, so he doesn't have all those spines, but he does have the ability to intake water and increase his size. They can do this for a couple different reasons, but it is a good way to help protect themselves from being swallowed. And then I also have a couple juvenile silversides in the net as well. So to finish off today, we have yet another hermit crab. This guy is inhabiting a discarded whelk shell. And so we're going to watch this guy go ahead and go back home. But thanks for joining me on my beach adventure today. I hope that if you guys get a chance to get out there, that you do beach responsibly. And we can't wait to see you very soon at the Emerico Science Center. Bye guys!